All right, so thank you guys all so much for being here, and thank you so much to Robin Harris for doing this session for us for historical colonialism in the South. And Robin, you can take it away.
Okay. Welcome everyone to this workshop. Thank you for coming out, because I know there's so many wonderful presenters, and at the same time that all of them are going on, but that's okay. I think someone was just saying that can actually go back maybe later and um, look at them. So I just kind of want to take my own deep breath because it has already been a very long day, and some of you have heard about my tragic 3 days of being what do you call it, hijacked, or uh, yeah, when you get your Facebook and your accounts get weird things happen to them. So that's how I've been spending my past 3 days. But again, thank you for coming out. And the name of this workshop is called Historical Colonialism in the South. I was born in Texas, and I currently live in Florida. And of course, being from Texas and living in Florida, living in Texas most of my life, I knew nothing else about anything else but Texas, really. And then I moved here, and it was like more light bulbs came on about around race, uh, politics, and all these things. And so I just kind of wanted to share today, just through experience, through uncovering things. Just kind of want to share this moment with you, and hopefully it's educational. It's educational to me, and so in advance, I appreciate you coming out to this presentation. And I think each workshop is like about an hour and a half or something. I don't think we're going to go that long, just because I know most of us have probably uh, been so kind in attending workshops. But so again, welcome to Historical Colonialism in the South. And you can go to the next slide. And I want to take some time to uh, to ground myself and to honor those who've gone before me. And so this moment is in memory of those who chose the sea. And when I was initially putting this together, I had come across this picture, and had even been educated about ancestors who were enslaved, and as they were being shipped to the Americas, as they were on the slave ships, they they jumped, and because they chose death versus what they knew or felt was going to be their destiny. And so there is a poem that talks about, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean is a sea, or a railroad made of black ivory. And that poem always just, it ignites me, because the poet says, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean is a railroad made of human bones. And then he repeats, black ivory, black ivory, black ivory. So for me, that says that some of my ancestors are probably at the bottom of the ocean, and their bones, their cries. And before I go to the next slide, I want to share that there's like this innate fear with some Black people about learning how to swim. And so this year, even though I'm not a teenager anymore, but I want to reclaim my strength and reclaim my fortitude and learn how to swim. because of that fear that's been in our DNA. I want to overturn that. So I want to dedicate this moment to those who chose to see so that I could live. Next slide. And I also want to do a land acknowledgement. I was very excited that even um, our instructors, they've been doing this uh, throughout our sessions. And just to say that, we're not doing land acknowledgements just to do it, but it's like really like this is real. This is historical colonialism, and each moment that we can take to overturn it, I say let's do it. And so part of that is recognizing that the land that we're on did not belong to us. So here in Florida, I want to acknowledge that I am on the land, the traditional territory of indigenous people, indigenous tribes, Seminole, Timucua, Tocobaga, and Miccosukee, and probably many, many, many others who were here before us. This is their land. And also, with that being said, I have to not only acknowledge this being their land, but also acknowledge that it was my ancestors who worked the land. And even with that being said, we have to acknowledge the uh, the kinship of the native or the indigenous and African people uh, that, and some don't talk about it, but those connections uh, created the pathway for our freedom. And maybe we'll get into that in this slide, but it's because of the ownership of Seminole, Timucua, Tocobaga, and the Miccosukee peoples and my people that we must acknowledge this space and this place for them. Next slide. So as we kind of heard throughout the day, we've been talking about shared language, and I thought it would be important to present some of these terms, and we've heard them today. These terms may add a little different slant, and I must say I want to give knowledge to earlier this year, I believe it was this year, or it could have been last year because the pandemic, it seems like everything, all the months ran together. But I had the honor to be chosen to attend like a 4-week intensive by some indigenous peoples, and we talked about these terms. We talked about settler colonialism, and how I was chosen, I don't know, but I'm just so glad that I was chosen. So real quickly, and just to make this a little more interactive, how about if someone would like to unmute themselves and you could read the term imperialism, if you'd like.
Imperialism refers to the creation and maintenance of unequal relations between regional cultures reinforced by military and economic power.
Thank you. Sounds a lot like the US. Okay, next term, colonialism. Would someone else like to? I don't want you to be sickened to hear my voice the whole time.
Colonialism, the exploitative, historical, political, social, and economic system established when one group or force takes control over a colonized territory or group. The unequal relationship between colonizer and the colonized.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gil. Another reader. Okay, I'll take it. Thank you guys for reading that. Extractive colonialism, as in British colonialism in India, when the greater political power draws on the resources of a place with less power. There's a little quote they had from the class, y'all left, but you left a mess behind. and then this settler colonialism, as in British colonialism in the US or Australia. Y'all never left. And this is a resource from the session that I took. So all these terms are very important, I believe, even as Green Party folks, that we begin to understand how important it is for our politics to be so targeted on and with in alignment of colonized people. And I think and I'm not saying that we don't know it, but I think that if we could increase it and make it part of our language and our politics, that we can truly build camaraderie with more indigenous people, with more African people. And when I use the term African, I'm talking about not only African, but I'm also talking about those of us who are in the US. So, but being able to understand, because when we understand the language, we can understand the hurt, the pain, and the struggle. Thank you. Next slide. And here's some more words, and we kind of had some of these if we've been attending the sessions with frailty myths. And I won't read them all of that, but they are important when we approach this. So identifying factors based on categories relevant in a particular society, race, class, gender, age, citizenship. Oppression, such a heavy word because it is heavy to be oppressed. The combination of prejudice and institutional power, which creates a system that discriminates against some groups and benefits other groups, called the dominant group. It's very important that we understand these terms. What does it mean to be oppressed? And I'm gonna do something really quick. I wanna make sure that we are awake and that I stay awake. Just put in the chat real quick, what groups do you think are oppressed? What groups do you think are oppressed? I just want to take a look and see what kind of thoughts we have.
Environmentalists.
And you can just put it in the chat, but okay, that's good. What groups are oppressed? If you feel like typing. Give you about a minute. The poor, people of the global South, indigenous people in many places, Mother Nature and environmentalists.
Oh, I thought she was gonna go.
These are good answers. Black, brown, indigenous, poor, women, immigrants. It's almost like everybody. Yeah, Black, brown, indigenous, LGBTQIA, immigrants, poor, women. Yes, we are oppressed. Oppressed. Thank you for sharing that. So gender, non-binary. I'm glad to hear all of these terms because natives, Black and brown people, poor people, women, immigrants, LGBTQ, yes. We're kind of like getting the I still see some good ones coming in. Okay, great. So we have this painted picture before us because I think it's good to see it, not only to hear it, or only for it to be like just on paper, but to kind of see this oppression moving, target groups, because if it's a target, it means that you're moving here and you're trying not to be hit. So we have all these groups of people that are trying not to be hit by so many things. So thank you for that. Okay, microaggression, a term that helps describe oppressive, violent, or discriminatory behaviors that happen on a small enough scale to be invisible to those who are not members of the targeted group, i.e. Black women. And this is often said referring to Black women as having an attitude, when they express emotions like frustration and anger, which is why there's a lot of violence against Black women because what they call smarting off or having an attitude is a strong woman, or it could be misunderstood. In the chat, real quick, let me know what you think microaggressions are. What do you think microaggressions are? Some examples of microaggressions. There's no right or wrong answer unless you put nothing. I want to pick your brains. I want you to rude behavior. Okay, yeah. Has you can put yes or yes, you people, yes. I really hate that one. Yeah. Wait a minute, at least someone said leaving a racist note in the church mailbox. Huh, yeah, that's a whole lot of things there. Yeah. Wow. Speaking for other people, okay. Those little, and sometimes, microaggressions are little small things, like little nasty things sometimes that you might miss it. These generalizations that we have, Black women having an attitude. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, or if I were to slam my fist down, if I was angry, I could be categorized as being violent. And this is oftentimes what plays out in society. Black people, especially Black men, are categorized to be a certain way because they act out or something, and so they're categorized as being abusive or they're going to hurt me, or so we have all these microaggressions, and it's mentally they're disregarding opinions and experience of others without knowing them. I want to look up because Holly was saying some things. Erase my, women, even the most privileged, face some kind of oppression, double or multiple jeopardy. Good points. Yeah. So these microaggressions, they can be so nasty, but it's we feel colonized. It's just, it doesn't feel good. Intersectionality is an enormously helpful theory of identity, power, and change. What we do with the complex analysis it generates is up to us. But the best examples suggest that there are a lot of people to organize and a lot of solutions to pursue. We can get to them, and I don't want to but let me get to the last part. The point isn't to get into smaller and smaller cohorts defined by identity, but to understand our lives and each other's, all the better to combine forces and win. So intersectionality it's really an old word in a sense, and we're hearing it now more, but it's the coming together of these different thoughts. Next slide. And so this seems to be, did we miss a slide? Can you go back? It seemed like that came in real fast. Okay, I guess not. Okay, so I think there was, I had some trouble this week. I was sharing with folks before we started. I got hijacked, whatever you call it, and so things look a little weird. So, but yeah, if you'll go ahead and play this one, it actually may be out of place, but we'll try to make it make sense.
There are over 300 treaties that have been entered into by the President of the United States. These are contracts between sovereigns, and many court decisions in the modern era have been enforcing these treaties. A lot of people disregard our treaties and say they're a thing of the past, let's forget about them. That's simply not how it works. These treaties under the U.S. Constitution are the supreme law of the land.
We're going to keep reminding the United States of their obligations to us. It's about honoring my ancestors, and it's also about a continuation of a people. We're not talking about past history, we're talking about today. Treaties are living documents because tribes continue to breathe life into them. We continue to speak their terms. We continue to remember the promises.
Thanks. So I think that one may have been a little misaligned. I hope that that's the only one that was out of sync. But we're building this, and we're just gonna stay right there. Where the thought is here is to understand what indigenous folks historically, and African folks and other category of peoples, the colonialism, in the intersection of that, what all we faced. And there are, I believe she said, over 300 treaties that have still not been honored. And we're on this stolen land. And I wanted to talk about, so with that being said, is the colonization of Black bodies. During the 1850s, millions of slaves lived in the South. They worked in textile mills, iron works, tobacco plants, laundries, shipyards. That's just to name a few. And it's important to understand that sometimes we think of slavery, this is how it was for me. You just kind of think of maybe, coming on a ship, but it was so much more of this devious plan set out. It was calculated. Folks were actually extracted, and not just from Africa, but from different places, and brought, whether it was a triangular effect or they were brought to the Americas. And this was an often wondered as a kid, well, how did that happen? How did they take over? Well, it was militarized. It was a militarized effort. Thousands of troops went to Africa, and in some places it was trickery. But a combination of all these things, and wealth and talent was taken. So we think about sometimes rules they took slaves, but in order to understand this, we're talking about families were uprooted, and whatever operations they had, and it wasn't always small scale, but these operations were uprooted and brought to the US. Some folks were dropped off in different places. They were dropped off Brazil or so many places around the world that there's so many things about slavery and its effect that's not talked about, because that's by design as well, but it's not talked about. And we can't even imagine this interruption of life, interruption of wealth, interruption of everyday living that took place. And the South, the colonization in the South, sometimes overlooked, but it pretty much points to and explains how our politics are and why they are the way they are today. But if I could just get you to understand this extraction from Africa, this is not just, we just think about slaves and how it was so calculated and planned. Troops, because as a kid, and maybe even you now, I always wondered, well, how did this happen? Even the pain in my heart sometimes was like, well, were they able to, why didn't people fight for us? Why did you not stand up for us? Because it's always unclear as to how in the world could this happen, but it was very planned, very calculated, just like now, just like the US colonizes other countries, pretty much the same way it happened back then. And so this extraction, this torment of wealth and talent. So next slide. So complete oppression, and think about the terms that we've already kind of talked about and read about. Complete, because oftentimes we think about slavery, we kind of talk about it and share it, and we think we should talk about it during February, Black History Month. But it's so much that happened, so much realignment, or I don't know if disalignment is a word, but the destruction of the Africa, the Africans, the destruction of people. It's so minute what we, even in our minds, we can think what we think about it. So this complete oppression, labor theft, and brought here, and guess who benefited from it? And I'm going to talk about some of this later, but labor theft, preachers here in the South, they benefited from that. Doctors, tradesmen, they utilized slave labor even for their own homes. Now, being here in the South, and I'm not sure at what point I'm going to go into it but I am now a tour guide for St. Augustine, Florida, and the things that I've uncovered, the things that I've learned, I'm like, Reverend so and so had slaves. Are you serious? And it's beyond my thinking at times to see how calculated and how deadly and how nasty that this system affected and impacted the South. Exploitation. The lives of African people in the South were controlled by customs. Example, slave codes. Slaves could not travel without a written pass. They were forbidden to learn how to read and write. They could be searched at any time. So when I talk about that, I hope that you can hear the systems that we have in place now and the things that happened. It echoes how we behaved in early days. We could not travel without a pass. This is why sometimes there's these movements where they refuse to get a driver's license, because it interferes with the right to travel. So I understand that I'm not telling people to not drive. If you do or don't without a license, it's not my business. But this is where some of this stems from, because of these type of codes. It was nothing but a code to intervene or interfere with our right to travel. Of course, learning how to read and write. Our whole educational system, even with indigenous folks, it's been interrupted to prevent us from thinking for ourselves. So a good book that I would recommend for homeschooling ideas or whatever, I would recommend, there's a book called Rethinking Columbus. Rethinking Columbus. It deals with so many things, and it helps us to regain our educational freedom back so that we can take education and for our children, or for even if you're an adult, to regain that freedom back. And also, they can be searched at any time. We still see that now. So the question you have to ask yourself, how much has things changed? So we're talking about 1400s, 1800s, and so forth. So, but this still happens now. The complete oppression, depravity. Slaves were whipped in the South. And now, and it's not to say that didn't happen in the North. There is a lie that says that it didn't happen in the North, but when I read books or talk to people, other tour guides, other historians, they talk about the maltreatment that happened in the North as well. Overseers would order their wounds to be burst, the wounds they already had from being beaten, but those wounds were burst, and turpentine and red pepper was put into it by control. All it was about was control and oppression. Keep them oppressed, to keep them working the lands, the fields, whatever production was needed. Next slide. Now, I brought up these terms again because these terms are, I would say, more textbook-like, because when I presented them at first, it was from, I would say, more of an activist lens. And I like those better, actually, because I think it's would more relate to what we see and what we hear. So, and the only new one that I'm gonna read just two here, because I kind of want to talk about that. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. And racism, the belief that different races possess distinct characteristics, abilities, or qualities, especially so as to distinguish them as inferior or superior to one another. Now, I want to ask a question, and there's no right or wrong, but in the chat, if you could put, and I'm gonna, hopefully this is a good question, but in the chat, if you could put or tell me what system do you think helped to produce racism? What system do you think helped produce racism? It's not a right or wrong answer, but I have something in mind. Okay, somebody says capitalism. What system do you think helped produce racism? Capitalism. Christianity. Make sure everyone has had a chance to answer. And there's no wrong answer, but I just want you to kind of to give this a thought. I'm gonna, you can research this. You can add to the answer you already gave me. Okay. Someone said all the C's. Good, good. Farming and the other labor-intensive industries. Good. Okay. Okay, and none of your answers are wrong. None of your, and I probably could have asked it better, but these are not wrong answers. But racism, or maybe even the production of it, or even the so-called validity of racism, if you think about it, and this is your homework like forever, would be science, if you think about it. Because what happened was, and that's a whole nother workshop, I'm gonna give you a definition that someone said and I thought was really good. And I hope I don't X y'all off, okay. Here's a definition of racism. Racism is a European invention of so-called classes or races of people. I'm just going to give you the short version because I don't want to go into the whole long thing of that. Classes of people, categorizing of people. How many of you remember maybe Science 101? And you know how they talked about, what's the guy's, Charles the guy, the scientist guy. Okay, I'm having, yes, Darwin.
Darwin.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Remember the classes of people or these classification systems. And so I'll challenge you to kind of study that. Black people were considered to be one of the lowest classes of things or classes. And this is so through science is really, or this classification system is really kind of where race gets its identity or its thought from, because all these old farts like Charles Marion, all these guys, yes, they got their idea about race, of how Black people, yes, you put it in the chat now, of how we were the lowest thing in Earth. This came through science. So a lot of times, is race an issue? Yes, but it wasn't the granddaddy of them all. The grandpa was really colonialism, if that makes sense, colonialism and imperialism. And so racism is what put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, and said, yes, because these people are this and that, they therefore need to be controlled. And I'm putting in very 3 days of no sleep terminology. I'm not using any of my educational big words, but yeah, I think you get the idea. So racism, yeah, even in Cuba. So racism is really not the grandpa. You've got colonialism and imperialism and capitalism. And I bring this up because oftentimes, you know, we're fighting these things. And I heard someone say, and I used to, no, what do you mean? But in Gil could help. Gil would know what I'm talking about when I say this. I heard this thinker say one time, racism is in the idea of white, is in the minds of white people. And as I began to research and understand that, it makes sense because it was this crazy white guy who thought about these systems and categorizing, and we adopted it. And we said, oh yes, race. He had all these ideas about race, thus racism. And so sometimes, yes, we can fight racism, but sometimes we miss the mark because the big guns are colonialism and imperialism and even capitalism. Because racism is about what someone thinks about you. We think, let's go back to the 1400s or whenever this system started. We think that Black people are not smart. So that thought, it built and built. So therefore, they cannot think for themselves, so we can control them. So this is why we say, we don't need you to like us. We just need our power back. You can think whatever you want to based on those systems, but we need our power back. Next slide. I feel like I went on that too long.
Slavery is a deplorable notion.
So, yeah, good point. Yeah, racism is what people think, and we've built on that. And we allow that to build up. So oftentimes racism is not that it's not important, but it's like you're beating the air because there's so many other things in place. Racism is what the colonizer needed to verify their thoughts. This is why Marion Sims and others were able to perform all these surgeries and experiments on the Black body of women. And I could go onto that forever and forever. So and I want to acknowledge what people are saying if I can. I was going to say education as well. You have to suppress a heck of a lot of history to keep white people thinking. Exactly. So that's what racism is about, is thinking. Racism is basically what somebody thinks about you. And what I'm trying to do here is to ignite another fire in us. And what I mean by that is, if a person is racist, and I'm not doing away with any of what we're learning because there is a place for it. But racism is basically white people whining about what they think about Black people. And so we don't need to waste too many more years trying to get white people to like us or to verify us. What we need is our shit back. So we need to overturn colonialism and imperialism. That's what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. We don't need to waste our time saying, oh, if you could just accept me. I don't really need you to accept me because I was already here. You needed us so bad to come clear up this shit all over that you extracted us from our family and our businesses that we already had. And so now we want our shit back. And we need to be back in control like we already were. Okay, now you can play this.
One person owning another is just not acceptable in today's world. But history bears out the ugly truth of rich, white plantation owners in Southern America owning Black Americans and treating them with harsh physical punishments if they went against the owner's wishes. However, those television documentaries and references in history books seldom explore the very personal horrors faced by those who were enslaved some 2 centuries ago. Here are some instances where slaves were forced into extreme sexual behaviors and reproducing children to replenish the number of slaves solely for the benefit of their masters. Number 1. Slave women were subjected to many sexual improprieties. Among them were violations by their masters and their sons, forced matings, and arranged marriages. Number 2. Historian E. Franklin Frazier said stockmen were weighed and tested before being put into a room with young women to mate for the purpose of bearing children. Number 3. By the end of the 18th century, the breeding of slaves was a common practice. Laws were changed so the public could view slaves as things instead of people, so the owner could do with them as he wished. Slave owners even began believing that slavery was grounded in the Bible. Number 4. American slaves in 1860 were worth $4 billion, which was far more than the $228 million worth of gold and silver circulating back then. Even the value of Southern farmland, $1.92 billion, did not amount to the worth of the slaves. So for the owners, their slaves were worth everything to them. Number 5. The mortality rate among slaves was very high, so their owners would often encourage or force them to have children. Even at the age of 13, females were expected to begin having children to replenish the slave stock. They were expected to have 4 or 5 children by the age of 20. They were often encouraged by their owners to do this with the promise of freedom. Number 6. Female slaves who did not cooperate with their owners to bear children for them would be subjected to many and various punishments, both mental and physical. Number 7. In some instances, the females who bore children for their owners were given gifts, including extra clothing, the withdrawal of any harsh treatment, and sometimes, if their quota was met, freedom. Number 8. Women who did not or could not bear children would not be given any breaks or rewards that were given to mothers, and they would do the same work on the level of men. Number 9. If a woman was deemed infertile, she would sometimes be separated from her family, and owners would sometimes split up married couples and require them to choose new partners. Number 10. Male slaves at the age of 15 were inspected to see if they could breed well. If it was deemed that they could not, their testicles would be castrated. Over the course of 5 years, each young male was expected to get at least 12 female slaves pregnant. According to the slave narratives, a male slave named Bert was said to have fathered over 200 children. Number 11. Plantation owners would often take the pretty female slaves and put them to work in the household. But if the owner showed affections or gave favors to the pretty girl, his wife would subject her to torture. If the pretty slave bore a child, the owner's wife would behead that child. Number 12. To provide entertainment for his friends, the plantation owner would sometimes arrange orgies among the male and female slaves. His friends would be allowed to join in them. Number 13. A slave wife could never be faithful to her husband, as most owners demanded she have affairs with other men, nor was she allowed to remain pure or virtuous. Number 14. Some male slaves were purchased by their owners solely by the size of their penis, and the black men were often raped by their gay slave owners. This process was called breaking the buck. And finally, number 15. Not all owners abandoned the children they fathered with female slaves. Some would provide them with education and money, and some owners even set free their mistresses and mixed-race children. That's all for today. Let us know what you think about today's topic in the comments section below. Don't forget to like us and be sure to subscribe for more stories like this. Get addicted to the good stuff.
Okay, next slide. Just put it on pause. The next slide. There's a lot to unpack in those few minutes. We don't have time for it. But so the whole idea of race, it's so many contradictions even in the term racism. But we see there the explicit torture and demand, because all that was done for production of whatever plantation or household they were in. The production of children. And so much. I don't have time to go into, and I thought I was gonna be done early, but that's not gonna happen. So we often think of when we think of slavery and slaves, we only think of the white male. We never think of the women being the white women being involved. And so, but I found this little article from a long time ago, and it says, I'm gonna try to have a Southern voice. $50 reward, ran away or was stolen from me on Saturday before Christmas last. A Negro woman named Ann of black complexion, about 19 years old, pretty far advanced in pregnancy. I have been informed that she is at or near the plantation of Mr. Jordan, 4 miles from Pensacola on the stage road. Any person who would deliver her to the guardhouse in Mobile shall receive the above reward of $50. I have been informed that J.D. Humphreville took her away from my residence and pretends he is her owner. The public are cautioned not to be traded for her, as the title to said woman is in me alone. Elizabeth Humphreville. It is a she, and she is the owner of said slave. So I would encourage you all to read, there's a book called They Were Her Property, and it talks about the colonial oppression of white women in the South. And the reason why that's important is because the first, when Trump won, they did the breakdown of like voters. And here in Florida, that there was like, I think 40% of white women voted for Trump. And I just thought it was interesting because we never, we always, when we talk about white supremacy or we talk about all these things, we never look at the women. But right here in Florida alone, right here in the South, from Florida up to the Carolinas, white women were engaged in slavery. White women were slave owners. And there is a book called They Were Her Property. And we don't have time for me to go into a lot, but I just want to read a little passage from They Were Her Property. And I would encourage you to maybe pick that up. The term mistress did not signify married woman's subservient legal position or a woman's subordinate status to the to that of a master. By definition, and in fact, the mistress was the master's equivalent. Thus, when South Carolina legislators declared that every master, mistress, or overseer shall and may have liberty to whip any strange Negro or other slave coming to his or her plantation with a ticket, that passed an enslaved person had to carry when he or she left the master's estate. They were not to imbuing mistress with subordinate powers or power in their husband's stead. They were recognizing the comparable powers and authority that these women possessed. The term used to describe women's control of subordinates was not mastery, but mistressship. White women participated heavily in slavery here in the South. And so when we think about, oh, she wouldn't have done that. No, they really participated. You know, we watch movies now and she's like crying, fake. White women participated. And I'm not just leaning towards, when I think about those numbers that voted for Trump, because slavery and all of that participation wasn't a Republican thing. It was all across the board. But I just thought it was very interesting that 40% of white women voted for Trump. And there was somewhere where I read a while back, almost mirrored the same amount of women who owned slaves here in the South. Next slide. That was a video. I don't think we're going to have time. So it was just it was a reenactment of a white mistress. You can go to the next one. And so the feminist movement was steeped in oppression. I don't have time to go into a lot of that because I do want to open it up for conversation. But someone tell me in the chat, who's this woman on the Black woman on the, I just want to make sure y'all not sleep on me. The right, the Black woman, just light up the chat.
Sojourner Truth.
Yes.
It's Sojourner Truth.
Well, Belinda, she didn't give y'all a chance to answer, and that's okay. Sojourner Truth. Well, her speech got hijacked. Who do y'all think this lady is? Do y'all know who she is? Well, she stole, this is your homework to find out who she was. She hijacked Sojourner Truth's speech, Ain't I a Woman? And so the reason why I want you to do that is because I think it'll bring up good conversation, because this again speaks to the colonization of white women that's been happening for years. When we talk about eugenics, we talk about, this is why the conversation around abortion is not always, no, you're fine, Belinda, is not always so easy, because the ripping away of the Black body in another Black body has always been easily done. And either white women wanted us to nurse their children because they wouldn't. They would take our children and then they would kill our children. Find out who this white woman was, because the speech that we kind of hear now is not the original speech of Sojourner Truth. It was hijacked. This is why, even though you may see that I have done some work for a feminist organization, but I do not categorize myself as a feminist because of their connection with eugenics, slavery, their nastiness to Ida B. Wells, just a long history. So, and this type of oppression. But I'm bringing all these things up to say that white women were just as much a part of. Yes, somebody already put it in the chat. Yes, white women played a part in slavery and oppression just as much as men. Next slide. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna go through this kind of fast because we're almost at 6. So, Southern strategy, colonialism in the South is a real thing. Uh, if someone could read just this portion here, y'all can't see my finger, but cocaine, crack. I want to talk about it. I mean, not really, but if someone could read today, cocaine, I want you to hear this, not just me talking about it, but if you could read that, if someone could read that for me, if you can see it.
Sorry for background noise, but today, cocaine may be stereotyped as a drug favored by whites, business executives, or rock stars, perhaps. But its beginnings were mired in racism, in some cases, forcing cocaine use on Black slaves and workers for increased production.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can just stop there, and that's good, because we can go on and on and on. So, all this, there's so much that could be said here. Sometimes people, they play around with that thing, when Whitney Houston, she makes the comment about, crack is whack, This goes, but the usage of cocaine, it was used on slaves to produce, for production. It just, and we don't talk about that. And it's very little history about it. It's very hard to find. I had found something else, but that particular medical article, when I went back to find it, I couldn't find it anymore. And this is all that I could find to present to you guys. But there's and it says the racist history of cocaine. I'd like to say the colonizing history of cocaine, and the imperialistic history of cocaine, and the capitalistic history of cocaine, because they were given this so that they could produce. That means something. Okay. So strategy. Shifted the drug concern. Is that me? A law enforcement issue to become politically convenient, tough on crime platform. There's so much that I could go to into that. I don't have the time for it. Drugs and epigenetics. White America, capitalism, and colonialism are responsible for the disease, for the dis-ease of drugs in Black people. Next slide. It's in our DNA. These systems of this drug usage, it's in our DNA. Southern strategy, I do and I don't want to get into this whole political thing, but these guys were, I'm not gonna say that, it was gonna be a bad word, but the Southern strategy, the colonization in the South has always been horrid. And it wasn't just a Democrat thing or Republican thing. It was by design. It was by design. Southern strategy till this day, it criminalizes, it instills fear. Jim Crow laws are returning in Black codes. We have an asshole of a governor, DeSantis. The passage of HB1 proves that. HB1 here, it means that you could become a felon for protesting. And these voting strategy laws now, it's our governor coupled with the Georgia governor. Next slide. If you could click that to refresh it. So I interviewed in the position that I had in that organization to just expose all kinds of stuff. This young woman, the Honorable Georgia State Representative Park Cannon, she knocked on the governor's door because it was supposed to be an open forum, but she knocked on the door because he was signing that horrible bill that Georgia passed. It pretty much just increases voter suppression. She knocked and she was arrested. And so we talked about how voting rights in the South, this Southern strategy, how they mirror each other. It's like they're hitting us from both ends. This is why it's really important, and I don't have time to get into it, that we build a green structure in the South. There's so many states in the South that don't have ballot access. So the bill that DeSantis passed, our governor, was so-called public disorder. But that means if there are 3 or 4 Black people on a corner, maybe talking loud, you could become a felon. Next slide. I'm so sorry, I gotta rush. Next slide. So yeah, this one was, I had this conversation. This Melba Pearson is an attorney. She ran a race against, yes, she's a Democrat, but she's pretty cool. She ran a race against a woman who was in bed with law enforcement. The whole time her opponent, I mean, we're talking like about 10 years, state, I forgot what the position was, I'm so sorry. State prosecution or whatever. The whole time that woman has been in office, only one charge, if that. And so Melba Pearson, she ran against her, of course she lost, but we spent some time talking about some bills that came down through Florida, and it was a package. Now, I didn't really go along with all, they were all pretty weak, but the Florida Legislative Black Caucus had tried to pass packages called Fair and Just Police Reforms. Do you think any of them got heard or passed? Hell no. But all this is by design because all ears and eyes were on this HB1. HB1 passed the day those clowns took siege of the Capitol. Next slide. So, real quick, and I don't have time to go into it, but I'd like to have a discussion with folks maybe at some point later. What Greens can do. I think we could upgrade even our 4 pillars. I hear all the screams and shouts from all over the world, all over the nation of Greens. The languaging is kind of general. I think if we're going to overturn colonialism, imperialism, all those the big guns that we can strengthen the languaging in peace, ecology, social justice, democracy, because sometimes our language blends in with that of the 2-party system, probably, and it's probably not meant to, but we need to have the voices of the colonized people, African, indigenous, poor, working class people, to make a stance on what our 4 pillars mean. This not attack against Howie or anybody, but I think that we are due for upgrade. Next slide. And as I'm closing here, our systems need to be repaired, decolonize. And as I said earlier, it's nice that we can probably be nice to each other, that we can sing Kumbaya and join hands, and we can meditate and all that, that's cool. But I say turn over the resources, overturn capitalism, reparations now. I would like to see the Green Party be a stronger party. And a lot of us are running for office. I'm one of them. It'll be nice for you to like me, but I just need you I need more than that. I need you to help me to decolonize the systems. And we do that by repairing. We do that by overturning capitalism. That means that someone says land back, all those things, turn over the resources so that folks like myself and other candidates that try to represent this party that we can be viable. Most times we cannot be viable candidates because we get shitty resources. We don't get anything. That may not be anybody's one person's fault, but in order, even for me to be a viable candidate, I need resources. Whoever our next, whatever, people that are running for governor from the Green Party, they need resources because we're talking the language of decolonization. We're talking about overturning capitalism. I sure as hell talk about reparations now. So I'm going to stop talking. You have all have been wonderful in listening to me on only a few hours of sleep. So I'm gonna open up to comments, questions. I don't know how many minutes we have. But we're open. Is Kristin still with me?
I am. Do you want me to moderate?
Yes, because I don't know how to moderate.
Cool. All right, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello? Yeah. I like the ideas. So, overturning capitalism, decolonization, reparations now. We have to explain it to the average voter in a language that they understand. If we keep saying capitalism this, capitalism that, they have no idea, they get turned off by it. So we have to, like you explained it earlier in your lecture just before, earlier, in plain language. Let's try to use the plain language to try to explain it to people, because the people on the opposite side, we might be able to convince them and say, okay, now I get it. Over.
Okay.
Anne, go ahead.
Hi, Ann Link. It was all interesting, and there was a lot of stuff. I like that there's a lot of stuff that we can, sort of do our own reading on. You're talking about sort of these myths that are used to justify, enslavement and that sort of thing. But my education in school was basically the North was good and the South was bad. I went to school in the North, but when as an adult, when I read more, it actually was the whole entire country was bound up in slavery because they all made money on it. And maybe it wasn't the farms in the North, but it was the mills and the bankers and all of that. So it is interesting how something you've been told all your life, is a total lie. But you have to really sort of search for, like the thing about the cocaine in being used in the 1800s. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Like, it's really hard to find this factual information that would go against the myths that are prevalent. Over.
Let me respond to Anne really quick. Yeah, and once I had found more information when I went back to try to make it part of my this presentation, I couldn't find it anymore, and I thought that was really strange. The whole study of epigenetics. Now there is if you find some articles on there that some of it does allude to it, but it's like so much to try to find a way to condense it. But epigenetics is this, this whole thing during the pandemic. Oh, Black people are, because they eat bad, blah, 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 blah. But no, it's because we were extracted from our homes, and then we were fed this horrible diet of cornmeal and fat and all this stuff. That's what started producing horrible health. And so epigenetics, if you get a chance to study that, it's kind of like a new term, but it's essential, epigenetics. But we don't talk about that much. So, but thank you, Anne, for sharing that.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Robin. Gil, go ahead. We have about 7 minutes left, just to give everybody some context.
Yeah, I mean, just to Jeff's point, I don't think it's just about semantics or terminology. I mean, it's really good to know this history, but one of the things that I think is important is when you're talking to people who may not already agree with us, is that it's about today. It's not just about what happened 100 years ago, 200 years ago, pre the civil rights movement, but it's about resources that are being stolen today. It's about systemic oppression that's happening today, and it's about dividing people. I mean, sometimes left, right, even one of the things I found really helps people understand this is the demographics of the U.S. That you're still a white settler colony, that the planet is 86% black and brown, so you can't maintain a white majority society without violence, not violence in the past, but violence today. And that helps people frame like the police violence or something else, that the borders, et cetera. It helps them frame it in a larger context. And often people will if you get away from the isms and just talk about people's lives and what's happening and the struggles people are having, and how by dividing us, the bankers control us. People will understand that without necessarily agreeing to be an eco-socialist.
Thank you, Gil. Well, if there's no more questions or comments, maybe we can salvage some time before the next sessions and get a little break. I thank you all for listening and sharing this moment with me. And perhaps some of this, we can take some of this, and maybe some of us can get together and talk about this on a different level. And I appreciate all of your patience on today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kristin. Hey, Dee.
Thanks so much, Robin, and thanks to everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting now, and we'll see you at our next session at 6:30 in the main room.
Thank you.
Bye, Ann.